Hi there. Happy Friday. Hello. Hello, and welcome to the Brooklyn Rails 1123rd New Social Environment. I'm Chloe, Director of Programs at the Rail, and I have the extreme privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Susana Vargas Cervantes, Roxana Fabius, Beya Othmani, Mindy Seu, and Charlotte Kent. And now I'll introduce today's guests and host. Susana Vargas Cervantes curates, teaches, and writes. Vargas Cervantes is an interdisciplinary scholar, internationally recognized for her artistic and academic work at the intersections of alternative criminology, visual studies, and queer studies in both North and Latin America. Roxana Fabius is a Uruguayan curator and arts administrator based in New York City. Between 2016 and 2022, she was executive director at AIR Gallery, the first artist-run feminist cooperative space in the US. Beya Othmani is an art curator and researcher from Algeria and Tunisia, dividing her time between Tunis and New York. Currently, she is the CMAP Africa Fellow at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. Mindy Seu is a designer and technologist based in New York City and Los Angeles, currently teaching as an associate professor at University of California, Los Angeles in the Department of Design Media Arts. And our host today, Associate Professor of Visual Culture at Montclair State University, Dr. Charlotte Kent, has a particular interest in historical frameworks for art practices, with a research focus on contemporary digital culture and the absurd. She writes for assorted magazines and various academic journals, and we are incredibly lucky to have Charlotte as an editor-at-large for the Brooklyn Rail. And before I pass it over to Charlotte to get us started, I want to remind everyone attending today that you can submit your questions at the form in the chat that we'll be posting throughout the program. And over to you, Charlotte, to get us started.
Hello, thank you, Chloe, and thank you to everyone who's joined us. Thank you to the amazing organizers of this show. Uh, I have so many questions and so many ways I want us to get started. But if we could start with the first slide to launch in, one of the things about this effort is a sort of, focus on collectivity, on group efforts and on group flourishing, and working together is hard. um, so I thought I would start by asking, what brought you together to put this exhibition together? And how did that work, this work?
I'll jump in and start and say, first of all, thank you to the Rail, to Chloe, to Magli, and Charlotte. Thank you so much for moderating and thinking so deeply about the work that we're doing. It's very appreciated. How did it start? Working together collectively is indeed hard, but it's also very rewarding, I would say. So it started almost 2 years ago from a request by the director of the Ford Foundation Gallery, Lisa Kim, who cannot join us today because she's somewhere else in the world, but was as instrumental to the formation of the show as all the curators. And in those early conversations about what developing, well, I met with Lisa. Lisa and I have known each other since my early AIR days, and Lisa has been a very important source of support. And Lisa and I met, and she was like, I wanna do a series of shows about violations of bodily autonomy and gender violence. And we were talking about it, and immediately we understood that the only way to do this was to do it collectively. and with a large group of minds thinking together. And that's how the first proposals of what the exhibitions would look like and the people that will work on them came together. And amazingly, the people that were in those first proposals are sitting here today. So I guess that's a very magical thing. In terms of the process, and for the people that maybe were not able to see either this show or the last two shows, Cantando Bajito is a series of 3 exhibitions that has been taking place at the Ford Foundation Gallery since March of 2024. But Susana, Beya, Mindy, and I together with a larger group of curators have been working since 2023, thinking, negotiating, reading, doing many studio visits, and making decisions collectively. And that's the way it worked. We really met multiple times to learn from each other, to suggest artists, and think what an exhibition that has multiplicity as a value looks like. The first steps that we took, well, I'm going to say the names of everybody that participated because I think naming everybody is important. So it was Susana, Beya, Mindy, Kobiko, Isis Awad was, let's say, the first group that put together the curatorial guidelines of what the exhibitions would look like. And then we also invited Maria Catarina Dunca, Maria Carri, Sasha Cola, and Marielen Pereira to join as our advisory committee. So we've had a really amazing group of thinkers working together since May of 2023. And I'm just gonna say that the 3 exhibitions were sort of divided, but in a way they were conceived as an exhibition happening at 3 different times. So same space, different time.
Yeah, maybe
I don't know. I don't know if anyone wants to jump in, but I can continue speaking. Bea is like, yes. I don't want to take too much time about this.
Well, I was going to say, I think we might come back to the way in which the 3 shows also are one show when we're talking about how in this one, the different installations also connect to each other, because
Yes.
I think that that will sort of help visualize some of the bigger ideas. I mean, it's one of those important parts that we talk about, but it's, curation as knowledge production, right? There are things that can be expressed through the space that I never quite land in language in the same way, right? There's a reason for these 2 different modalities. So maybe to start, in fact, even just thinking about Candiani's work, which is the next slide, Chloe, and I should share with the audience, we're not going through the show as if like it's a tour where you walk in the doors and so forth. We're moving around. And there's some places where we'll highlight the way in which things are juxtaposed or associated with one another. But with this work, I feel like this is a striking work in the context of, some of the major themes in the show around, an aesthetics of vulnerability, resistance, but also flourishing, and also a unity of disparate voices, right? This notion of chorus coming together. With Candiani's work, you have these figures that are taken from press photographs of protesters around the world, inspired, if I understand correctly, after the 2019 rape of a teenage girl in Mexico. And so, it's one work in 3 parts, but it's also a series. Can you tell us a little bit about like introducing this piece and really sort of how you were conceiving of what it was contributing to Cantando Bajito?
Is it okay if I answer this question? Well, thank you again. And in this work, interestingly, as Roxana was saying, Tanya Candiani's work was one of the first that we thought of, even as we had not yet come to chorus. So within the first meetings, we were already thinking of her work precisely because of these conceptual frameworks that come to light. These three different, they're cross-stitched, no, how do you say?
Embroidered?
Yes, and they're taken from, like, as you said, the glitter revolution after a rape of a woman in Mexico City, and then the resistance that happened by many women marching together on the streets. That is something that we see in many different places in the world. So Tanya and speaks to this unity of different voices that you were talking about. So we have one, Tanya would take after the photographs that had been published in newspapers of this protest. So in a way, the aesthetics of vulnerability really takes us to these specific works. And this points to an understanding of vulnerability that we read and that we talk about a lot during the three different moments of Cantando Bajito. We understood vulnerability after Judith Butler and Leticia Sapsaib, in which specifically Judith Butler talks about how traditionally we have been understanding vulnerability as something that we have to overcome in order to find resistance. And the reframing of it is exactly after looking at the protest in Argentina, all the protests of Black Lives Matters, in which bodies are really vulnerable within the infrastructure, and they're only sustained by other bodies and by the infrastructures in the streets. So the bodies that are protesting are vulnerable, and it is in this vulnerability that we find the resistance. So Judith Butler is talking about how what we need to overcome is the traditionalist and masculinist discourse that has told us that vulnerability needs to be empowered in order to find resistance. And that has given us a vision of women as victimhood that has not allowed for a lot of surviving and then flourishing. So in this way, this work of Tanya Kandani really shows us how the vulnerability is in the streets with women marching and helping each other, working interdependently to protect each other, to care for each other. And it is in this caring that we can see the flourishing happening. There's other works in which, like the first one that you showed of Archivo Trans Argentina, but at the end it was because we were thinking of chorus as more in the collective. We were looking first for collectives and then artists that work within collectives. So this work, we had not selected it, but we had thought already of Tanya Candiani's work since the beginning, because we were working on that conceptual framework of how it would look.
Yeah.
I wonder
if it might be helpful just to look next at Fatma Charfi's work, just so that we can keep the audience seeing some of the different works. Because I also want us to be able to then look at Huda Afshar's work, because I feel like some of what you're talking about gets really brought up in her work. And maybe we'll get a chance to come back to Charfi's work, because this beautiful, I think there's some of the messaging there. But this notion of vulnerability, but of working together, responding to protests, of responding to violence against women is also present here. And so I was wondering if we could just briefly speak about this piece too, as we're moving through.
So I'll jump in on that question. Thank you, everyone who came today to attend this talk. So yeah, the work of, I'll start talking about the work of Fatma Sharfi and then move to Huda Afshar, if that's okay. So the work of Tania Kandiani, Huda Afshar, and Fatma Sharfi, three of them reflect on historical moments of collective mobilization and assembly in public space. Fatma Sharfi's work, more precisely, if we can go back to that slide, it would be great. Yeah, this work, Mutation 1, produced in 1992, is made with glued cotton and silk paper, and it was produced after the first Gulf War and the fall of the Soviet Union. And these two events really influenced the artists in the making of their work, because it was a time when the artist was seeing in both images of extreme violence circulating in the media, as well as images of mass anti-war demonstrations around the world and mass migrations from the former Soviet Union. Images to the artists that held promises of hope. And I don't know if you can clearly see it on the slide, but the work is made of dozens of tiny black human figures that the artist produced, twisting silk paper. And these tiny black figures converge together in places in the work, and they spread apart in others. They are very fragile, right, and vulnerable because they're made of silk paper. But at the same time, when they're assembled together, they form this black mass that is protective and powerful. And we can also see that in some parts of the work, the figures, some of the figures stand alone in the center of the crowd as if they are dancing, and they're being shielded by the collective. So Mutation 1 is part of a series of multiple similar works where the artist staged situations involving assembly and movement of those figures. And in the way we found that that work was a meditation on vulnerability as well as strength in collective and collective assembly. Moving on to Huda Afshar, a work that we actually displayed right next to Fatma and Tania, you know, in that order we thought about, because very similarly, her work Intern was produced in 2023 during the emancipatory movement Women, Life, Freedom that took place in Iran, and which started in 2022 after the arrest and murder of Jina Amini by Iran's morality police. In the photographic work, Afshar staged a group of Iranian Australian women dressed in black, coming together and braiding each other's hair. As you can see, we don't see their faces, their backs are turned, and their faces are hidden. For the artists, staging them in this position was a way for them to become surrogates for other women protesting in Iran, you know, from their own locality. So a way of practicing what we call, you know, local transnational solidarity with these women. They actually, you can see that they are braiding each other's hair, as I said, or, you know, releasing a dove. You see on image number 3, a bird flying above them that they had just released. These images mirror some images found on social media of women in Iran that were defiantly discarding the veil during those protests, or other images of Kurdish female fighters who braid each other's hair before heading to battle against the Islamic State. So yeah, all of these 3 works really explore the use of performance, performativity, gesture in collective resistance. Let me know if you want me to develop more on any of those points.
Well, I was gonna say these are, I think if we go to the next slide where we have these 2 works next to each other, what I was going to point out is like these are also quite large, right? These are
Right.
the scale of the photographs we were just looking at is really significant. These are these feel more than human size, right? The sort of scale of them seems significant, and yet they feel like they're I don't know what the right is, but like that one is connected to them in that way. And so I was just wondering, as because we're next going to be moving into to the textiles as seeds work, if you could just briefly speak about like you're moving between representation and abstraction, or I should say figuration and abstraction, moving between this kind of like, forward facing, but also with the backs turned as a kind of protection thing, like some of how you were thinking about that type of those representational issues in this context where there's also vulnerability in being seen, and at the same time strength in being seen. And so just how you were weaving that line through.
Right. Anyone wants to answer?
I mean, Beya, do you wanna do it?
Yeah,
or-
I can say a few words and then pass it on to one of you. I like that you pointed to the fact that the works have different scale. And in the case of Huda Afshar's work, for instance, the photographer, the artist really wanted to have the photographs printed in this large scale. And although they are very large, the fact that they are so large makes us able to see the details of the texture of the skin, of the hair. So they actually create a kind of intimacy, for the spectator and the images. There's been people who have seen the work, and we can see the goosebumps on the skin of one of the protagonists, and they've said, that they had goosebumps as well, looking at the goosebumps, So there is this, I don't know, this transmission of intimacy, of feeling, of materiality that happens in this large scale. And at the same time, correct me if I'm wrong, but the work of Tania Candiani achieves a completely different effect. These expanded women on a stretched textile canvas rather, create this sense of maybe power and distance, and they're coming together in strength and keeping like shielding from violence. So I feel like the scales are both producing in those two cases different effects. And then moving on to the question of representations and images, and how we thought about the circulation of images that inspired those works. Maybe I pass it on to Roxana. You wanted to add something about that, Roxana, right?
Sure, but I don't know if you want to go first to Sevicias and then or
Oh,
I'll just add a little something not to the issue of scale, and maybe I'm answering to a question before it comes, but the issue of scale was something that was really important through the entire series of shows, and because something that we see again and again is that there is almost like an intrinsic need to honor and monumentalize and celebrate the characters, the stories, the actions that are being either represented, or if it's a pattern that's celebrated. So we, as curators, we had to honor that scale and negotiate how works coexist. And I mean, Beya will speak a little more about this one, but that is something that's certainly present in Sevicias as well. Yeah, in terms of figure eight, I think in terms of the circulation of images, one of the main things that we did thinking about circulations of images was have conversations with the artist of what can or cannot be shown. And we're going to speak later about the collective desk, but in the collective desk, we have a lot of research images, and like some things could be shown and others could not. So that's also something that was considered, having trust and conversations with the artist of what's possible and what isn't, and issues of protection and what you were saying, Charlotte.
This work is operates sort of like an archive, if I understand correctly, this weave. And so and there's a degree of archival practice that's going on, across many of the installations, and then sort of gets reiterated through the collective desk you created. So with this one, maybe we could speak just a little bit about the way in which this textile work and this group effort is also representing a type of archival memory.
Yeah, so this work was produced by a union of weavers, researchers, and artists called Textiles Semillas, translated as textiles as seeds, and they are operating in northern Argentina, and made up of more than 30 cooperatives of weavers and activists and researchers and artists. And yeah, one of the intention of Textiles Semillas was to practice forms of epistemic resistance through weaving. We know that a lot of indigenous people and communities in Argentina have been violently oppressed throughout actually the last century, and one way for them to survive and to reclaim their space is to preserve some of and pass on some of the knowledge that they inherit. Some of the knowledges, so much of this knowledge is embodied in textile making and in weaving practices. And so, yeah, this collective display is produced by multiple actors, protagonists operating within this union. That is not, they don't sign it as individuals. They chose to display it as a collective together. And yeah, it's not only an archive, but it's also an attempt at performing or being a collective and what it would look like in space. Some of these works they've been woven by multiple weavers. We don't know which one, and that is not the point. But I love this idea because they literally embody the idea of coming together, forming a united front or a whole. So yeah, each piece embodies that collectivity, and then together the installation tries to do this or rehearses this.
It also, it as it probably reminds many people in the audience, this self-naming of textiles as seeds also, right, brings back that that phrase, they thought they could bury us, they did not know we were seeds, right?
Right.
And the way in which that's been a phrase used by those who've been marginalized and oppressed since the 70s, if I remember that correctly. But it also, this materiality, I think, really then comes through in Mai Ling's installation, which is is another collective, right? And so we'll come back to this one because it'll connect us to the next work. But to talk about Mai Ling, because one of the things about this work, and in truth, many of the works in the exhibition and that you chose, is that they are so layered. It's not just that they have, that they're multimedia or that they are using lots of different types. It's just that they themselves, between the materials and the ideas and the connections being drawn, are so dense. And this is, I think, one of the sort of foremost examples of that. And I was wondering if you could speak as curators about how you thought to make it possible for audiences to engage with the work that is going to do more than just like the visual presentation, right? If all you do is just look at the sort of screen and the pillars, that's not going to tell you the whole story. So how do you as curators, how did you think through that and work through that so it would be something that people could get the larger story around?
Yeah, that's a very difficult task, right? Especially because in a way, and I'm not speaking here as an official Ford Foundation gallery person, but one of the things that was requested from us as a curatorial group was, or ensemble, was that the works are communicative, that someone that's coming, from the street and just pops in can look at it and grasp something from the exhibition, connect with a few different things. And that was something that was top of mind for us during the entire process. Just a little bit of background about Meiling and what this work is. So Meiling was founded in Vienna in 2019, and the collective as a whole is dedicated to creating works that have this sort of dialogue around racism, sexism, homophobia, against Flint, which is a German acronym that the letters mean women, lesbian, intersex, non-binary, and trans people of Asian descent. And it's a growing network, which means that we don't know all its members. And for the longest of time, we didn't know, like everybody is called Meiling. And Meiling is a character from a 1970s German sitcom that represent that for them. They wanted to reclaim this name because it was a character that was a sort of a general woman of Asian descent that was like born in Thailand, but wore a Japanese kimono, never spoke, never got like the gift of voice. And it's, as Charlotte was saying, it's a super, super layered installation. The whole installation is dedicated to a plant that's the plant is called kudzu, and it was brought to Europe in the times of universalist botanics, but then they found out that it's very hard to eradicate. So it's a parallelism or a metaphor between the strength of the kudzu and their own strength. And from the beginning, the proposal was to create a large-scale room so people would be able to have a moment with the work that would be a little isolated, but it does require a large time dedication. So one of the things that we decided collectively was that the sound of the video is the soundscape of the entire video is the soundtrack of the show. So once you come into the show, even while you're, looking at other works, you sort of get familiar with what you're hearing and start getting into the mood of the video. And the exhibition, as we are talking, it's everything is in dialogue. I mean, up to the point that what we're seeing next to Meiling in the screen is Cecilia Granara's intervention that we're going to talk about later, but responded to the show. So that sort of dialogical nature of like that call and response is present.
Could you actually speak about that since it's here? Because she did this canvas painting, but obviously there's this addition to it. There's this curve connecting one work and then moving into the collective desk. Could you just speak about that addition since it came up?
Yeah. Susana, you want to go for it?
Sure. So this painting that is entitled Eyes, Light, Blood, Stars is by Cecilia Granada, first conceived it in in a very specific show that was in dialogue with another artist called Carol Rama that has deceased and that worked a lot through pain and overcoming pain. And that in many of Granara's paintings, that is also that we can see it in Tanya's, there's this red that is blood and that is emotion, and like these powerful connections between emotions and colors. And there is this blood stream that has these hands that can be ancestors, other bodies have passed away, our own way of overcoming pain, that to us talked a lot about the collectivity that is already inside the body of female pain that has to overcome that pain. But in this precise painting, what is also powerful and why we chose it and talk about it, because it can coexist at the same time, this rawness of emotion and this pain, along with joy and the caring through the collective with these hands that are present but are also from ancestors. Inside, I don't know if you can see their eyes. And these eyes also talk about what you were mentioning, what Roxana was mentioning, the vulnerability of being seen and the layers that you also mentioned. And then in many of Cecilia's shows, what we found very beautiful and wanted to include it in the show was this in situ painting that you can see in the other slide, that again speaks about of this rawness, this blood stream through all of us, through all the works. And first she had proposed something, but what we like is that once she is in the gallery and seeing all the other works, she does this at the end, this braid that is at the same time a serpent maybe, but that brings all the resistance and powerfulness of vulnerability together through the whole show. I don't know if this
No, I think that
I don't know if this was done in purpose, but the fact that it's at the end really brought this, it sort of tied it together.
it was a reaction to, so there are a few elements or symbols that repeat themselves in the show, one of them being braids. That's present in Hoda Afshar's work, and it's also present in the private practices archive. So, well, of course, in the weaving of the textile. So, like that, the strength on the weaving, the strength on the braid as a symbol for collectivity, is something that Cecilia could only grasp by reacting to a show and being there, right? And that's how the proposal changed from this like river of blood and guts and ancestral knowledge was transformed into collective action through the braid, which was very beautiful.
Just because I'm aware that I only have a little bit longer with you both, with you all, I'm wondering, just because this piece then does lead into the collective desk, if we can go to slide 16, just to talk about that for a moment, then we can maybe go back to some of the other installations. This also, of course, has a piece in the center there by Archivo de la Memoria. No, that's not. Is that right? Yeah, it is. Okay. I'm trying to make sure I have all my groups together. So that piece in the center there, and is this sort of collective desk area. So how did you, so it becomes a part of the show also. How did you situate this? This has been a recurring element across the different shows, but how did you select it? What were you thinking to do here? So on.
I think before going deep into the collective desk, maybe it's worth unpacking maybe the second denotation of the word chorus. So of course, it's like this assembly of people, but it's also maybe the most popular stanza of a song, the earworm, the thing that you want to repeat over and over, that almost starts to feel like a call to action. So I think this idea of invitation, you really start to see in Mai Ling's work, and maybe we'll talk more about their performance if we have time. But the collective desk then also feels like some sort of call to action. Desks are workspaces, they're participatory. Many of the things that you see in this section are handleable. The audience can pick them up and look at them and move them around. The bookcase on the side are many of the readings that were very influential for us during the research process. But the different components of the table are archival projects, however literal or expanded, of different types of groups. So I don't know if we have a close-up shot of LACA on the end of private practices. Maybe we don't.
I'm sorry.
No worries. But actually at the very end of that table, you'll see a black coil, and that's actually a braid. So when Cecilia saw that braid, and also the braids in Hoda's work, I think that's what transformed this tale and the piece into an actual braid. So a lot of the works start to feel quite dialogic. And I'll also highlight this flower arrangement. So that was by the artist Lasagna Cruz, and it's almost like a collective sculpture. So she interviewed various organizers and asked them to suggest a flower and tell what it was representative of, what it might symbolize. And then she kind of created these sculptures that will stand for this symbolic work, but also live and die in the space. So she'll recreate these sculptures throughout the duration of the exhibition until December. Oh yeah, Beya just put a close-up of LACA's piece in the chat if people want to take a look at this. LACA stands for Los Angeles Contemporary Archive. They're an artist-run space by Haley Lohman in Los Angeles. And one of their collections is the AAPI sex worker collection called Private Practices by Kayla Tange. And this was basically all this ephemera from the long lineage of sex work in Los Angeles over the past several years. So you'll see things like their pleasers, these candles and totems, postcards, braids. The red thing in the corner says a blowjob bib. But there's also a lot of components that try to track this archival practice over time. So there's a blog that they printed that's 400 pages and spiral bound, because at that time, that was their most common way of preserving a digital space instead of some other emulation tool. So I think this table felt quite nice in that it was cacophonous, it was participatory, it felt very resourceful, and there was a lot of energy in this space.
I guess one of the questions that it sort of brings up, right, is in the context, and then maybe this is a way to go back to the installations, is, this is its own installation. It's a sort of curatorial and participatory installation in which people get to engage. And then there's, so maybe we could go to, let's actually go to maybe the Chloe Bass on slide 14. Where this is a part of this larger project where she's been working with different families and especially multicultural families, where it's like the issues of representation there. And I was struck by the fact that with this one, you put them side by side, and then there's another one. So how, I guess, besides the ideas that are present in this particular installation and artwork, for you all as curators, how are you thinking of putting these pieces that are meant to be, that are like, this one is a very intimate work. It's about like the family and about the home and about the issues of that, so that they could be discrete, but also still be in relationship to each other, right? That's one of the challenges with positioning installation projects in groups, that often we find ourselves sort of feeling like we're going from like one cubicle to the next, as it were, right? And in the space, that doesn't happen. And so, and yet at the same time, it's important for each work to be able to have its own space and breath. Speaking of chorus. So I'm just wondering if you could speak a little bit I do actually mean here the challenges in the sense of like having to move things around. Like once you're like you've taken it from the heads and you're in the space and you're putting things on walls and in how you were thinking of actually situating each of these voices to sing on its own and yet together.
Well, let me tell you, it wasn't easy. Um, I think a key word, it's gonna be almost like kitschy, but a key thing here was compromise and trust. We learned the needs and conditions, like the people that know best what the needs and conditions are for their work are the artists, and we tried as much as we could to respect those needs and conditions. Sometimes that didn't happen because installing remotely, for example, Textiles Semillas, this was the first time they did such a large scale structure. And originally, we all envisioned it to be in the center of the room, a sort of totemic figure in the center of the room. But it didn't work because it needed a white background. It needed that background for the transparency of the works, for it to contrast, for it to be fully viewed. And we spent a long time trying to resolve that. And then at one point, we're like, oh, this is what it needs. And that doesn't answer the question of the layering and how the dialogue between works is created, but it does answer the question of physical needs. For this show, some practical...
Roxana, I'm thinking, could we go to slide 22 just so that the audience can get a picture of the sort of room with the different works together? Yeah, thank you.
Right, yeah. So you see here, this is a good example because when you Textiles Semillas is the work that's on the right side, that structure that has so much transparency that when it was standing in the middle, it was really hard to see it. So we really needed it to be against a white wall backdrop for it to be fully appreciated, and people can still circulate around it. So we sort of achieved that in both ways. For this particular show, we built 2 walls. They're not different from other shows that have happened in the gallery. We didn't build the walls to be up to the ceiling because for Chloe's work, we needed intimate domestic spaces. So like having a wall that's, I don't know, 16 feet would have been too monumental, right? But the multiplicity of wallpapers also help define space. And the same with the wallpaper in the Archivo de la Memoria Trans. Like we wanted to create a space there that felt domestic and home. And that's why we have so many wallpapers in the show.
It occurs to me, this might be a moment. I'm so sorry, but could we go to slide 17, which is both the entrance and the exit? There was something for me about it being more noticeable for some reason after having experienced the show. Like it hit me more. Again, this intimacy that you're speaking of is one of the reasons I thought it'd be useful to bring up here. But also as a way to hopefully speak about this, the Transmemory Archive of Argentina, and this, because there's a couple of different works, just to speak about their work and the photographs, the piano. There's a lot of seating in this exhibition that's there as
and
a
we
part
wanted more, but we couldn't fit it.
Yeah, if you could just speak to that a bit.
I'm gonna let Susana speak about Archivo de la Memoria Trans. I'm just gonna say seating was part of access and generosity, and we really wanted more. It's not a joke. It's because it's a layered exhibition, it requires time. So doing it comfortably is what makes sense. And I'm gonna let Susana speak about Archivo de la Memoria Trans.
Thank you. So maybe, see, this is where it starts. The idea of the piano was actually Lisa's. And when we were talking about it with Archivo was founded in 2012. They gave us an amazing workshop during the convening. That's something that maybe we want to talk about later, even though I know there will be not much time. But normally you get into this intimate space of your grandmother's house, and then you see this maybe traditional piano, and then you see the photos of all normally, traditionally, the heterosexual couples that have conformed your family. And in this occasion, then you start seeing up close, and there's photographs of trans women that have actually survived and lived a lot of gender violence, a lot of gender violence to their body autonomy, and the way that Archivo Trans has worked through those lives in creating a different type of memory in which they themselves can tell their own stories and tell it in a way that gives them back the dignity and the flourishing that also happened at the same time as the resistance to the dictatorship. And they told us too that they believed it was going to be better during the democracy in Argentina, but it was quite the opposite. So you get up close and then you see that it's not a traditional and normative heterosexual family, but are the photographs of survivors of trans women telling their own story of flourishing. And this is the first as you come into the show. And then in the last one, you have that other piece by Archivo de la Memoria Trans Mexico, because after 2012, in which Argentina has been the lead of archiving and telling their own story, there has been around 16 other archives around Latin America that have rise in Bolivia, in Peru, in Mexico, in Cuba, that are following the same construction of their stories and archives. And in the last one, we have another piece where the collective desk is, and it's also in the middle of Archivo Trans Mexico, that what they do is that they take the...
Slide 16.
Thank you. The clothes of other trans women that have disease in a way to recreate their memory, and they paired up different generation of their collective to work into creating a different type of clothing that will embody the memory of the deceased person due to HIV. So if I can, in looking at it and through this conversation and in looking at this, I guess that if we can choose one message, it would be that, or maybe we don't have to choose one, but it really seems that flourishing is at the beginning and at the end of the show through collectivity, or the flourishing that we can find in the collective.
I'm gonna have to turn it over here. And I guess one of the things I wanted to share that I found really beautiful about this work is that there is a sense often, especially in the discourse around resilience, that the idea of it's something you want to overcome. You want to overcome vulnerability. You want to overcome the situation to somehow be in a powerful position again, right? Like you're resilient in order to not have to be resilient, to have everything be okay, to be stable, static, whatever the other words come in there. And for various reasons, it seems like that's a very limiting viewpoint, right? In the sense that life is flux and that things are not stable, that's a part of actually generativity and so forth. But also there's a great deal of pain in that, right? There's pain and there's suffering. And um, and in the works that you brought forward, often the artists are responding to really severe traumas and violences, um, and it's not over, right? And there's a way in which, without in any way sort of diminishing or choosing to forget or anything like that, what's happened, that there's the possibility of standing in the pain and in the vulnerability and in the discomfort and in the, thinking of the knotting that Charfi did with the silk in order to be able to make that work, to get through the experiences of everything that was going on. And that somehow passes the time to get us to the next thing. That struck me profoundly in looking at these works, the way in which the practice allows us to get to the next place. So for that, I wanted to really thank you all. I have to hand it over now to all the other people who would like to ask you questions. I didn't get to half of what I was hoping to ask you. That's inevitable, because there's nothing like a collective to require more time. So thank you. And Chloe, I'll hand it back to you and the Rail team to open it up for Q&A.
Yeah, thank you all so much. This has been such a joy to listen to. And I really appreciate everyone's conversation and dialogue around this amazing exhibition. The first question is going to be from Magli. And before I pass it over to Magli, feel free to post your questions in the form in the chat if you have one. Magli, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Thank you again so much. This was such a wonderful conversation. I wanted to know a little bit more about the programming that was surrounding the exhibition, or the programming curated that accompanied the exhibition, if that makes my question more clear.
Yeah. Anyone wants to take this? I'll do it.
You go ahead.
So we had convening 2 days after the opening that integrated some of the artists from this show, some of the artists from the previous shows. I mean, it was open to the public, and also had some we had a lecture by Leticia Sapsai. We had, as Susana was saying, an amazing workshop by Archivos La Memoria Trans. We had a screening with Seba Calfuqueo and Ángel Cayumán of films by indigenous queer filmmakers from South America. We had a beautiful lecture performance by Savannah Morgan, and we had an hypnosis session and 2 or 3 sound toning exercises. So it was a very full day. Am I forgetting anything? And the amazing performance by Mei Ling that was an edible forest, and it was titled We Eat Dirt, or We All Eat Dirt. And it was a participatory performance in which we collectively, guided by them, created an edible forest, and then after it was finished, we were able to eat it. So we can have maybe we have some images of that, but that's it, right? Did I forget anything? And we're gonna do tours of the exhibition in the next few weeks. We have a Spanish tour coming up, an English tour coming up.
Yes, I'll link
So
that in
that's the spirit
right now. But thank you so much. It seems like a lot of time and care went into this exhibition, and I'm excited to go visit it myself and see it.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question, Magli. I am wondering, I have a two-pronged question. I'm curious, knowing the context of the exhibition is in New York, but in the US at a very interesting time in US politics and history, and how braided US life is with individualism. And so the call to action that's sort of innate to the exhibition is very interesting in this context. And I'm curious about that context and how you were thinking about it as curators, thinking in relationship to Ford Foundation as an organization and the US as in its own histories. But then also in relationship to that question, I'm curious if there was another place the exhibition could go, where would you take it?
I don't know where it could go. The context of the US, it's definitely something that was present through the thinking of the show and what prompted the exhibitions as a whole, where it could go. And in terms of the call to action, I think collective action is as necessary here as it is everywhere, or maybe more. But part of when we're doing the research for the exhibition, part of the things that we were thinking was like how in the degrading, legal battles for bodily autonomy, how Mexican feminists across the border are helping American women get abortion pills, for example. That was something that was discussed. And where it could go, I don't know.
It's funny because when you asked that question, I heard it much more literally, like where could it travel to as a traveling exhibition? Which also feels nice because the curatorial group and the works in the show are extremely international. So it's kind of nice thinking about this from a more like intimate nationalistic standpoint. Like what if it did go to Mexico City and Uruguay and Tunisia and where all the home places of these artists are? It's kind of a nice way to consider rather than trying to think of large scale museums and galleries and filters of that sort.
And yeah, and in thinking about the destination of the exhibition, we're also thinking about the afterlife of the exhibition and how we can make it circulate and maybe in other forms. And we've been thinking about potentially publishing a reader of some sort or editing a record as well, because so much of the show is centered around voice and sonicity. So it makes a lot of sense for us to have to produce a record and circulate it, and then it can travel without needing a gallery to host it.
Yeah. How nice though to have an exhibition catalog that's like a vinyl album.
So
I think one thing that we have not talked about amongst ourselves, but it came up as we've been in this interview, is that I think that the four of us are very used to living in translation. And we did that automatically without noticing. And in thinking of how the show could go like physically to another place, it will add this different layer of how we like, and I'm not referring only to language, but I'm referring to ways of living and methodologies in understandings of different notions of time, of the intentions that are very different. And now that is past and I see it from far away, I'm like, so much went into translating, like all the different methodologies and works and we're very used to it that didn't even notice.
Which automatically like inserts a dialogue into the care and into the orchestration of the exhibition, right? It's really beautiful.
Yeah. It also suggests, no, go ahead.
No, please. Yeah.
I guess one last small note. It also suggests that we couldn't really make assumptions. We had to like constantly clarify contexts and situations and media, and I think this made it feel like a very, very rich exhibition and convening.
I'll also say I'm surprised by how quickly it was put together, even though the timeline that you laid out at the beginning, my own experience with collaborative work is that it takes more time for all the voices to be heard, right? For that kind of checking and figuring out what the right compromise is. And um,
Can we give some credit to Roxana Fabius for facilitating the collective effort? Really, Roxana was an important figure in, mediating between the different voices and making sure that everybody has a space and can thrive in the collective. And I think every collective needs those types of figures, right, in them for them to function. And thank you, Roxana,
Beya,
for making it happen.
I was gonna say the other side, like everybody was so open and like we were, as Mindy was saying, judge like there was a phrase that one of the collaborators used at some point that were like we're in this space of suspension of judgment, and I think that was true for the way we communicated and the way we wanted to learn from each other at all times. So it was a real privilege. I mean, more than anything, it was work, but privilege to be doing it.
Also, maybe now's the time to say a huge thank you to the Ford Foundation team. Lisa Kim was amazing, and working with Mary and Jamie and the entire team, it really made the process so much smoother. So thank you to Ford Foundation Gallery.
Yes, totally. And Chris Nuzzi that also produced the convening.
Thank
And
you.
I think that one of the, sorry,
No, please.
So we talked about this at the beginning, how we wanted to do what we were saying we were doing. Like, so in our own working together, like the four of us, but we wanted to really curate in this, with this very collective intentionality, where I think what Roxana said was very beautiful about trust. I think that we all trusted that it was always the best for the show. And we had this infrastructure that supported us. And it's true, without the Ford Foundation infrastructure they're so well organized and it's so, they make it flow.
Yeah.
So, yeah, like I don't think that it could have happened in a different structure or organization unless we had that, like the guidance of Roxana, but all the team, like Lisa, and there's like 5 people at least. Lisa, Mary, Jamie, Emily.
They are like the people that work in styling the shows that were partners in it too. Z and David, like there's an amazing team, and everybody had their hand in it. It's everybody contributed.
Well, I want to thank you all so much for this beautiful conversation. And I know that Charlotte has prepared a reading to close us out. So with that, I'm going to pass the microphone over to Charlotte to end us with language.
So this is very short. It is slightly unexpected, but among the I discovered the readings and areas of interest of the collective team in putting this show together was actually one of the first known authors, a woman, an Edwina from Mesopotamia. And I had randomly sort of shared this little bit with them. And so here I am. I'm going to share a part of the Exaltation of Inanna. It's one of the first examples of writing. It's a political poem. The Morgan Library introduces the section I'm about to read with this. And Edwana includes astonishing autobiographical details, such as her struggle against a certain Lugalan, most likely the historically attested king of Ur, who attempted to forcefully remove her from office. Yes, I took up my place in the sanctuary dwelling. I was high priestess, I and Edwana. Though I bore the offering basket, though I chanted the hymns, a death offering was ready. Was I no longer living? I went towards light. It felt scorching to me. I went towards shade. It shrouded me in swirling dust. A slobbered hand was laid across my honeyed mouth. What was fairest in my nature was turned to dirt. O moon god Swen, is this Lugalan my destiny? Tell heaven to set me free of it. Just say it to heaven. Heaven will set me free. Thanks all.
Thank you for that reading, Charlotte. That was such a nice way to conclude today. Thank you again, Beya. Thank you, Susana. Thank you, Mindy. Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you, Roxana. That was such a beautiful dialogue today, and it was so wonderful to listen to. Thank you to Hannah for your support in preparing the images that we were looking at today. Thank you to the Terra Foundation for American Art, who sponsor the New Social Environment and make daily conversations like this one possible. The rail is 24, and a donation directly supports us, our writers, our staff, and our operations. There's a link in the chat where you can donate to support our work. And if you're free on Monday and Tuesday, before or after you vote in the 2024 election, join us for a screening of Political Advertisement, 1952 to 2024, a project by Marshall Reese and Anthony Montaras, investigating the evolution of political advertisements in the United States. And with that, everyone can turn on your microphones and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Wishing you all really lovely weekends, and thank you again.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
you all so much.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks,
Bye.
Charlotte.
Bye. Thanks, everybody.
It was great.
Guys,
Have a
Bye,
good
everyone.
one.
Take care. Many congratulations.
congratulations.
Thank
Beautiful.
you.
Go see the show, please. Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you,
Bye,
Roxana.
everyone.
Let's see
Thank
Susana.
you, folks.
Mindy. Thank you. Keep up the good work.